9 forgotten stars from Hollywood's golden age who endured or narrowly avoided lobotomies. When people picture classic Hollywood, they imagine luxury and elegance under the studio lights. Actors and actresses seem to live dreamlike lives crafted for the cameras. Yet beneath that glossy illusion hid something grim and unsettling. Many performers wrestled with mental illness during a time when psychiatry was still crude and punishing. From the 1930s to the 1950s, a gruesome cure gained disturbing popularity: the lobotomy, a procedure that severed neural pathways in the brain's prefrontal cortex, was performed by inserting an ice pick through the eye or boring into the skull. Though intended to calm patients, the operation frequently left them vacant, shadows of who they once were. For actors whose emotions defined their art and careers, the consequences were shattering. Several screen legends faced this brutal fate, while others narrowly escaped it through timing, luck, or connections. This is an exploration of one of Hollywood's darkest, least discussed chapters. The men and women who were lobotomized or nearly subjected to it remind us how easily fame could become a trap. Their experiences exposed not only private suffering, but also the ruthless machinery behind Hollywood's golden image. It was a system that treated stars as property, even if that meant destroying their minds to maintain control. As Frances Farmer once said before her final fall, "I'm here so people can understand who I truly am." 1. Frances Farmer, Hollywood's defiant rebel undone. When Frances Farmer arrived in Hollywood in the 1930s, she looked destined to become a legend. With striking beauty, piercing intellect, and unfiltered intensity, she stood apart from the studio's polished starlets. Performances like Come and Get It, 1936, drew comparisons to icons like Greta Garbo, but Farmer's refusal to obey Hollywood's strict codes made her a target. She skipped publicity events, criticized the press, and challenged directors when she disagreed. In a business built on obedience, such defiance was unforgivable, and she was branded difficult. Her decline began with arrests for disorderly conduct in the early 1940s. Alcohol problems and possible untreated bipolar disorder gave studios an excuse to write her off. By 1943, she was confined to Western State Hospital in Washington, the beginning of 7 years lost in psychiatric wards. The full truth of her treatment remains uncertain. In her posthumously published memoir, Will There Really Be a Morning?, Farmer described horrific abuse: beatings, cold water hosing, forced feeding, and electroshock without anesthesia. The most terrifying claim was that she underwent a transorbital lobotomy, the ice pick surgery made infamous by Dr. Walter Freeman, who performed such operations in assembly line fashion. Though no official records confirm it, those who saw her after release recalled a haunting transformation. "The light was gone," one friend said. "It felt like talking to someone wearing Frances's face." Whether or not she was lobotomized, her spirit had been broken beyond repair. After her release in 1950, Farmer attempted a quiet comeback, even hosting a local TV show in Indianapolis, but her film career never recovered. Whatever brilliance she once carried had been extinguished by trauma, treatment, or both. Frances Farmer died of esophageal cancer in 1970, aged 56. She remained forgotten until the 1982 film Frances, starring Jessica Lange, revived her tragic legacy. Her story endures as a stark warning about how Hollywood punished women who refused to conform. The real tragedy, film historian Margaret Barnes observed, isn't only what was done to her, it's what we lost. A life of promise was erased simply because she would not surrender her independence. 2. Rosemary Kennedy, America's hidden heartbreak. Although Rosemary Kennedy never appeared on screen, her story is inseparable from fame through her family's prominence. As the sister of John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Ted Kennedy, and Patricia Kennedy, who married actor Peter Lawford, Rosemary lived in the shadow of extraordinary public lives. Her fate became a grim reflection of how even privilege could not protect against the lobotomy era. One operation stripped her of her personality and her place within the family. Born in 1918, Rosemary was a charming young woman who struggled with mood swings and learning difficulties. Some historians attribute her challenges to brain injury at birth. Others believe she had dyslexia or an untreated mental condition. As Rosemary reached her 20s, her behavior began began alarming her father, Joseph Kennedy Sr. She often displayed erratic moods, broke social expectations, and most troubling to the image-obsessed patriarch, showed curiosity about men and romance, which in that era was deemed improper for unmarried women. In 1941, acting entirely on his own, Joseph Kennedy made a choice that would haunt his family for generations. He approved a prefrontal lobotomy for his 23-year-old daughter, carried out by Dr. Walter Freeman and Dr. James Watts. During the operation, with Rosemary conscious, Freeman instructed her to recite poetry and count backwards as he sliced into her brain with a surgical instrument. They continued until her words faded into confusion and silence. The outcome was disastrous. Once able to write, socialize, and express herself, Rosemary was reduced to the mental level of a small child, unable to walk properly, speak clearly, or care for her basic needs. The young woman who once glided through embassy balls was now severely incapacitated. Biographer Lawrence Niemer described the surgery as nothing short of tragic, an act that erased her very self. The Kennedys, mortified by the consequences, chose to remove Rosemary from public memory. She was confined to a Wisconsin institution, hidden away from the world for decades. To outsiders, the family claimed she was either living quietly or working with children with disabilities. Her siblings were urged to keep their distance. Only after Joseph Kennedy's death did Rose begin to visit her daughter regularly, and not until the 1960s did Rosemary's brothers and sisters reconnect with her. By that time, over 2 decades of isolation had deepened the devastation caused by the operation. Rosemary lived until 2005, passing away at 86. Although her later years brought better care and more visits, she never regained what had been taken from her so long before. The eventual acknowledgement of her condition spurred meaningful change. Her sister, Eunice Kennedy Shriver, helped create the Special Olympics, motivated in part by Rosemary's experience, and the family later championed mental health and disability rights. Yet Rosemary's ordeal remains a haunting example of how women's mental health was pathologized and punished, even within America's most powerful family. Her lobotomy was never about healing, it was about control. That same reasoning fueled thousands of similar tragedies during one of psychiatry's darkest eras. 3. Jean Tierney, a beauty spared from the scalpel. Jean Tierney embodied Hollywood radiance in the 1940s. With her distinctive overbite, dubbed the Tierney bite, and luminous green eyes, she captivated audiences in Laura, 1944, and The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, 1947. Yet behind her elegance lay profound emotional turmoil that nearly led her to the same fate as Rosemary Kennedy. Tierney's mental health decline began after a series of devastating personal blows. While pregnant with her first child, she contracted rubella from a fan who ignored quarantine to meet her. The infection left her daughter blind, deaf, and intellectually disabled, a fact that filled Tierney with lifelong guilt, though it was no fault of her own. A later miscarriage, her collapsing marriage to Oleg Cassini, and the strain of balancing fame with personal tragedy drove her into a deep depression. By the early 1950s, her mental state had deteriorated so severely that she struggled to perform. "I had no peace of mind," she confessed in her memoir. "I couldn't sleep, eat, or stop crying." In 1953, after a near breakdown, Tierney admitted herself to New York's Harkness Pavilion for treatment. That marked the beginning of a long and painful journey through psychiatric institutions. She endured 27 rounds of electroshock therapy, each without anesthesia, leaving her in agony and robbing her of memory, vital to her career. The supposed treatment only made her worse. When doctors proposed a prefrontal lobotomy as a final solution, Oleg Cassini, though separated from her, stepped in. Horrified, he told them, "I'd rather have Jean with her struggles than without her soul." His defiance and influence prevented the irreversible operation, steering doctors toward gentler methods. Cassini's defiance likely saved Jean from the same fate as countless others who underwent lobotomies in that era. Eventually, she received compassionate care at the Menninger Clinic in Kansas, where early psychiatric medications helped her regain stability without the damage of electroshock or surgery. By the late 1950s, Tierney had recovered enough to return to acting. Though she never reclaimed her former stardom, she found peace in her later life with Texas oilman W. Howard Lee and remained active until her death in 1991. Film historian Victoria Wilson notes that Tierney's close escape underscores how even Hollywood's brightest could fall prey to the lobotomy craze, saved only by chance, love, and
and timing. If not for Cassini's timely interference, one of Hollywood's most dazzling stars might have shared the vacant gaze that marked so many lobotomy victims. Tierney's experience also exposes how poorly women's mental health was grasped in the mid-20th century. Her grief and anxiety, understandable reactions to deep personal loss, were instead labeled mysterious female troubles, requiring drastic medical correction rather than simple empathy and support. Enraged and bewildered, she once confessed, "I just don't understand what they're shouting about when I sing." 4. Judy Garland, A Step from the Scalpel. Judy Garland's battles with mental illness and addiction are legendary in Hollywood history, yet few realize how near the cherished star of The Wizard of Oz and A Star is Born came to being lobotomized during a hospital stay. Pills, shocks, and the threat of the knife, that was her treatment cycle. Her torment began early. As an MGM child star, she was fed amphetamines to keep her thin and barbiturates to make her sleep, a studio-approved cocktail that ignited a lifetime of dependence.
By adolescence, Garland was already hooked on the very drugs the studio handed out like candy. "We worked day and night," she recalled. "They'd give us pills to keep us going, then knock us out with sleeping pills. After a few hours, they'd wake us with pep pills again." That relentless rhythm of stimulants and sedatives, combined with the studio's obsession over her weight, pushed her toward inevitable collapse. By her 20s, Garland was drowning in depression, anxiety, and chemical addiction. She attempted suicide several times, including a notorious 1947 incident where she slashed her wrist with a broken glass. By the late 40s, explains biographer John Freaky, Judy was shattered, fired from MGM, marriage in ruins, and utterly spent from years of exploitation. Instead of gentle care, she faced clinical cruelty. During a hospitalization in the early 1950s, her doctors considered lobotomy a cure for her emotional turmoil, a fate that befell countless women labeled hysterical. Her salvation came through fame and the quick action of her third husband, Sid Luft. When Luft discovered the doctor's intentions, he pulled her out immediately, sparing Garland a surgery that would have erased the very passion that fueled her genius. Sid wasn't perfect, Freaky notes, but he saved her and the world from losing her voice forever. Luft understood that the very emotions doctors sought to mute were the heart of Garland's artistry. Though she escaped the scalpel, Garland endured years of electroshock therapy in the 1950s and 60s. Less disfiguring than lobotomy, these treatments still ravaged her memory, making it hard to recall lyrics and dialogue, a devastating handicap for a performer. "The shocks were terrifying," her daughter Lorna Luft remembered. "Afterwards, she'd look at me and not know who I was for hours. She'd be dazed, lost. It broke my heart." Garland's decline persisted until her accidental overdose in 1969, at just 47. Her legacy is often reduced to a warning about fame and addiction, yet it stands as proof of how psychiatry could become a weapon against women deemed too emotional or difficult. Garland's narrow escape from lobotomy shows that even the brightest stars weren't safe from barbaric treatments, notes critic Freya. For every Francis Farmer who didn't survive the operating room, there were others like Garland, spared by luck, timing, or privilege, not medicine. "He had nothing to declare but his genius," someone once said, and in her case, that genius barely survived. 5. Charles Henry Ford, The Artistic Sacrifice. Few figures bridged the worlds of literature, art, and experimental cinema like Charles Henry Ford, brother to actress Ruth Ford, who starred in Another Face and married actor Zachary Scott. Ford moved between Hollywood and the avant-garde, defining himself as a poet, editor, and filmmaker. Yet what makes his story chilling is the long-whispered claim that he willingly underwent a lobotomy in the 1940s. They told him it would make him calm. Instead, it made him vanish. Born in 1908, Ford was a visionary surrealist poet and the editor of View, a major art magazine. He mingled with creative giants like Salvador Dali, Marcel Duchamp, and Jean Genet. His 1933 novel, The Young and Evil, co-written with Parker Tyler, remains one of America's earliest openly gay works. Through both Ruth and his own projects, Ford hovered near Hollywood's orbit while redefining experimental art, but according to enduring rumor, he submitted to a lobotomy in the 1940s, possibly to treat his homosexuality or calm his supposed nerves. Some accounts claim Ford believed the operation would bring peace without dulling his creativity, a tragic error if true. What he thought might quiet his turmoil instead drained his intensity. His early writing burns with daring and chaos. After the mid-40s, the flame dims. The brilliance gives way to restraint. Something essential was lost. What's most haunting is that Ford may have chosen it himself, proof of how normalized lobotomy had become by then, with over 20,000 Americans subjected to it. Its chief promoter, Dr. Walter Freeman, sold the procedure as a miracle fix for depression, homosexuality, or overactive emotions. As medical historian Alana Konis observes, Freeman marketed lobotomy like a personality tune-up, showing photos of patients transformed from troubled to tame. In the end, Ford's treatment muted the very chaos that made him extraordinary, an artistic silence disguised as serenity. Few observers failed to note that those procedures often left people reduced intellectually, emotionally, and artistically. Ford survived until 2002, passing away at 94 after a long career as a poet, photographer, and visual artist. Although he continued to produce work, contemporaries recalled a pronounced shift in his temperament and creative methods after the 1940s.
That alteration aligns with reported effects of lobotomy, even though it was never conclusively proven. Charles Henry Ford's alleged lobotomy exposes a particularly ugly chapter in the history of psychosurgery. It was promoted not only as a last resort therapy for severe illness, but sometimes marketed as an elective fix for emotional regulation. Even the most gifted creators risked losing the sensitivity that gave their work life. If Ford truly elected lobotomy, it stands as one of medicine's cruelest ironies, Gifford observed. A treatment that promised relief from emotional turmoil may actually have severed the ties between feeling and creative expression that made his early work groundbreaking. I can't stop thinking about it. Hold tight, you're doing okay. 6. Diana Barrymore, once Hollywood royalty, later a cautionary tale. Diana Barrymore was born into Hollywood aristocracy. As the daughter of actor John Barrymore and poet Blanche Ulrichs, she carried a famous name. With that pedigree and striking looks, she seemed destined for stardom when she debuted in the 1942 film Eagle Squadron. But alcoholism, mental illness, and repeated personal tragedies derailed her promising career and led to institutionalization and whispers of a possible lobotomy. Born famous and undone by suffering, Diana's troubles began under the weight of her surname. The burden of living up to the Barrymore legacy was crushing, especially given her father's colossal reputation. John Barrymore, however, was largely absent, and their rare encounters were shadowed by his own decline from alcoholism. "I was a Barrymore," Diana wrote in her memoir. "Too much, too soon. I had to be a star, yet I felt like an imposter." Her film career lasted only 3 years and 8 movies, none major hits, and her professional setbacks drove her deeper into alcohol. She followed the destructive pattern that claimed her father, who died from alcoholism complications in 1942 as her career faltered. By the late 1940s, her drinking had escalated to blackouts, violent episodes, and suicidal thoughts. After several public incidents, including arrests for drunkenness, she was institutionalized repeatedly between 1947 and 1953, vanishing from the public eye for long stretches. It was during some of those hospital stays that rumors of a lobotomy began to circulate. No medical records have surfaced to confirm such an operation, yet friends reported disturbing personality changes after certain admissions. Those alterations were consistent with the effects of either lobotomy or prolonged electroshock therapy. She wasn't the same after one hospitalization. Ginger Rogers, who had known Diana earlier in life, later recalled, "The sparkle in her eyes had gone. She appeared vacant, as if an inner light had been extinguished." Other acquaintances disputed that view, suggesting her altered manner resulted from alcoholism, medications, and shock treatments rather than a psychosurgical procedure. The full truth is obscured by sealed files and conflicting memories. What can be verified is that Diana tried to rebuild her life in the mid-1950s. She returned to television, acted in Summer Stock, and published a best-selling memoir in 1957. Those attempts at recovery, however, proved fragile. On January 25, 1960, Diana Barrymore was discovered dead in her apartment at 38. Officials listed the cause as an overdose of alcohol and sleeping pills, though whether it was accidental or intentional remains unresolved. Diana Barrymore's life illustrates the particular vulnerability of Hollywood royalty. As biographer William Mann notes, children of famous performers often face crushing expectations while lacking stable foundation. When they faltered, the industry that profited from their names sometimes abandoned them to institutional remedies that could worsen their problem. Whether Diana actually underwent a lobotomy may never be settled, but the persistent rumors reveal a disturbing truth about the era. Psychiatric institutions frequently applied extreme measures to patients whose fame made them both valuable and exposed. Valuable because successful outcomes boosted ambitious doctors' reputations. Exposed because their struggles threatened to tarnish storied family names. 7. Clara Bow, the original It Girl. Clara Clara embodied the roaring 20s with her vivacity, sexual magnetism, and incandescent screen presence. As Hollywood's first it girl, she symbolized flapper freedom and rebellion, appearing in over 50 films before vanishing from the spotlight in the early 1930s. The circumstances of her withdrawal and later psychiatric care include troubling rumors of a lobotomy. The it girl became the forgotten woman. Beau's ascent was meteoric. Born into poverty and abuse in Brooklyn, she escaped her past via acting after winning a magazine contest that brought her to Hollywood. Her natural magnetism and uninhibited performances made her an immediate sensation. In films such as It, 1927, and Wings, 1927, Beau radiated a liberated sexuality that captured the spirit of the age. Her move into sound pictures initially appeared successful, her distinctive Brooklyn accent lending authenticity to her roles. Behind the glamour, however, she struggled. Years of studio exploitation, financial control by her father, and relentless press intrusion deeply damaged her mental health. Everyone wanted a piece of Clara, film historian Janine Bassinger explains. Studios worked her mercilessly, often producing 8 or 9 films a year. The press gossiped about her private life, and her father misappropriated her earnings. She had almost no protection. By 1931, Beau displayed symptoms that today might be read as anxiety, depression, or bipolar disorder. She suffered from insomnia, panic attacks, and wide emotional swings.
After public scandals, including a sensational court case involving a secretary, Beau retreated from Hollywood, supposedly for rest. What was meant to be a pause became permanent. Apart from 2 final films in 1933, she never returned to the screen. She married actor Rex Bell and moved to their Nevada ranch, living increasingly withdrawn as her condition worsened. In the 1940s, she was diagnosed with schizophrenia, a diagnosis that reflected the era's tendency to medicalize women's understandable responses to trauma. She endured multiple institutionalizations over ensuing decades and likely received electroshock therapy. Most disturbing are claims that she may have undergone a psychosurgical procedure in the 1950s. No records have been produced to confirm this, but visitors to Beau in later years recounted alarming changes in her demeanor and affect. The Clara I knew was lively, talkative, and radiant, actress Blanche recalled after visiting Beau in the 1960s. The woman I saw was a husk, quiet, distant, with a peculiar blankness about her, she added. Similar testimonies from others fed speculation that Beau had been subjected to lobotomy or intensive shock treatment that altered her personality. Some reports suggest her husband Rex Bell authorized treatments when she was judged incapable of deciding for herself. Whether those stories are accurate cannot be known for sure. What is indisputable is that the spontaneous, vivacious actress who had epitomized the 1920s spent her final decades secluded, heavily medicated, and estranged from the life she once led. She died in 1965 at 60, largely forgotten by the industry that had once celebrated her. Clara Beau's fall from it girl to isolated patient ranks among Hollywood's greatest tragedies, Bassinger observes. The traits that made her a star, emotional expressiveness, sexual openness, and impulsive vitality, were later pathologized as symptoms requiring control through lobotomy or other interventions. The psychiatric system effectively muted the voice of a woman who had captured a generation's longing for freedom. 8. Francis D's relative, Hollywood's hidden shame. Throughout the 1930s to the 1950s, Francis D built a respected film career, starring in works such as Little Women, 1933, and I Walked with a Zombie, 1943. Her marriage to actor Joel McCrea lasted 57 years, placing her at the center of Hollywood society, where she quietly learned of its hidden cruelties, including, as she later confided to friends, a shocking story about a lobotomized family member. One brief hospital stay and a single operation could erase a person completely. Friends close to Dee recalled that she sometimes mentioned a young female relative called a cousin or niece who was lobotomized in the late 1940s after behavior that threatened to bring shame on the family. That young woman, who had dreams of her own in Hollywood, was said to have been involved with a powerful, married producer whose affair turned volatile when she threatened exposure. It was a total cover-up, remembered a confidant who heard the story straight from Dee decades later. The woman was confined, lobotomized, and wiped from family history. Afterwards, her existence became taboo. Her name removed, her image gone. What makes this account so chilling is how it exposes lobotomy's use not just as medical malpractice, but as a social weapon against women men deemed troublesome or inconvenient. The operation became a means to silence, a way to eliminate those who could reveal the hypocrisy and predation that thrived behind Hollywood's image. Many young women were locked away to protect influential men, observed film historian Catherine Orison. Lobotomy was the final form of censorship, not temporary, but absolute. Who could trust the accusations of someone declared insane after brain surgery? The identity of Dee's relative has vanished, her name erased, her fate sealed in forgotten records. This anonymity makes her case difficult to prove, but hauntingly symbolic of the countless women who disappeared without acknowledgement. Dee never discussed the tragedy publicly, sharing it only in private conversations late in life. Her silence reflected the unwritten rule of the studio system: protect the dream factory even at the expense of truth. That unspoken loyalty kept Hollywood's image pristine while its victims remained invisible. She carried that story like a weight, recalled a longtime friend. Frances always felt guilty for not speaking out. By the time she could, everyone who knew the truth was gone, and she feared reopening old wounds. Though missing documentation, the story of Dee's relative underscores the grim reality of the lobotomy era. For every case that reached headlines, many more ended in institutional walls, their subjects erased and forgotten, the unseen casualties of Hollywood's golden facade.
We remember Frances Farmer because fame preserved her memory, but the unknown actresses, defiant wives, and discarded lovers who met the same fate, they vanished completely. They were the industry's disposable women. Even as public figures like Farmer and Jean Tierney became cautionary tales, they revealed only a fraction of a larger pattern. Between the 1930s and 1950s, major studios had quiet systems for handling actresses whose behavior risked embarrassment or scandal. These systems frequently led to forced hospitalization and sometimes lobotomy. A woman who cried too much, resisted control, or loved the wrong person could be eliminated without question. Studios like MGM and Warner Brothers had established channels for removing troublesome talent, said legal historian Thomas Peterson. They partnered with select doctors and private asylums, where young women were sent for so-called rest cures that sometimes escalated to brutal medical procedures. The victims fell into several categories. Some genuinely struggled with the pressures of fame. Others had been assaulted and threatened to tell. Still others were punished for their sexual orientation. The studios preached morality, but acted to shield profits and reputations, Peterson noted. Their investments in these women were financial, and if control failed, destruction became acceptable. Written evidence remains rare because studios meticulously avoided documentation. Yet first-hand accounts from nurses and orderlies at institutions like Norwalk State Hospital and Camarillo State Mental Hospital revealed troubling patterns. Young actresses admitted under suspicious circumstances, often brought in by studio representatives rather than relatives. There was a steady stream of beautiful girls, angry, frightened, not crazy, recalled a former Camarillo nurse in a 1990s interview. Once the forms were signed, they vanished inside, no matter how loudly they protested. Records show that electroshock therapy was common for women diagnosed with hysteria or nervous exhaustion, vague labels covering any behavior society disapproved of. In more extreme cases, especially when women threatened to expose abuse, lobotomy was the chosen solution. It was Hollywood's nuclear option, said Peterson. Though rare, the procedure permanently ended careers, and for studios, sometimes that was the point. When the risk of exposure outweighed an actress's value, lobotomy became the final resort. Behind Hollywood's glitter lay a quiet graveyard of erased ambitions. Contract players dropped from rosters, bit parts that never returned, hopeful women who disappeared after defying power. Film historian Victoria Wilson reflected that the true toll can't be counted. These women were meant to forget and to be forgotten. Their minds altered, their stories lost, their credibility destroyed before they could speak. The echoes of their suffering remain in the industry's modern struggles with abuse and silence. Though lobotomy belongs to medical history now, the instinct to suppress and discredit women persists. The instruments are different, but the aim is the same. Today, instead of surgery, there are legal gags, secret settlements, and career sabotage, all serving the same purpose: to bury the truth and protect power, no matter who it destroys.